Hi everyone, I'm Corey Camden. I am a senior here at Georgia Highlands. I will be doing a video presentation on the book Microtrends Squared for current health topics in health, and I was assigned chapter 12, Kids on Meds. Now, I am kind of glad that I was assigned this chapter because it was one that just kind of stuck with me. And it may be because I'm a little biased, but this chapter talks about the trends in healthcare, predicting the diagnosis to keep trending upward for ADHD in children, but also for the drug market to continue to trend upwards as well. So we jump in. On the second paragraph, they state, the diagnosis of ADHD in kids has jumped from just 3% to 5% to nearly 15% in the last 20 years. So it got me looking to the current statistics for 2020, 2021. And this number was for the children under 18. And it says that in 2018, we were sitting at about 4.6% of children being diagnosed with ADHD to 1.8% of children being diagnosed with ADHD in 2021. So the book was just slightly off by saying, they projected it to go upwards when it actually went down a little. And I think that has a lot to do with the pandemic, and they couldn't really account for that. So I think this may have skewed the numbers a lot from what they were actually predicting. So it says that according to the CDC, the number of American kids that are taking ADHD medications is skyrocketing. In 2003, 7.8% of kids had a diagnosis, as well as 2014's numbers that was now 11% for youth ages 4 to 17. And in IBIS world, the market for children of combined ages on Adderall medications was at 3.5% in 2018 when this was written, and it was down to 1.7 in 2021 as well. So once again, we kind of see how it trended downwards for the pandemic a little. Because even in 2021, it was staying at about 3.3%. And I think that 2020 and 2021 really pushed us to do virtual health, telehealth, telemedicine. And so we aren't necessarily able to go to the doctor and get children diagnosed as easily as we were once able to do. So I think that has a lot to do with the fact that it's just kind of trending down and not necessarily trending up. Now, they do state that the market for these drugs are surging, and the report from IBIS World puts the ADHD drug market at $17.5 billion by 2020. So I looked into that as well, and IBIS World in 2018 was at 9.4 billion, and in 2021 was at 9.7 billion. So the market is still rising, but not necessarily as much as what they were predicting it to be. And I think that also has a lot to do with the amount of people that weren't being diagnosed as what they were projected to be diagnosed. So if that number had increased and like they were expecting, then so would the drug market. So I think that the pandemic just kind of threw these numbers off just a bit. So they also state how easy it is for these kids to be diagnosed, and that is the first line of treatment is medication instead of other sources. So they state that children below the poverty line are more likely to be diagnosed with ADHD. And I think that's just because children below poverty lines they have more access to health care, and these children may have other emotional, psychological disorders that they just kind of label as ADHD and slap a label on it, prescribe them medications, and they move on to the next. And with healthcare and medicine moving towards virtual appointments and telehealth, these people below poverty are not able to access that same care. They don't have the internet and they're unable to seek treatment. And I think that's one reason that the number has decreased so much, is because we state that, poverty-stricken children are more likely to be diagnosed. But now that we have virtual appointments, the number of people being diagnosed has gone down. And I think that has honestly a lot to do with the skew in these numbers. Now, they also say that adolescent American boys are more likely to be on drugs for ADHD at 4.2% versus American girls, which sits at 3.2%. And only a little more than half of teens are using drugs for seen by a mental health professional within the last year. So it states that boys are more likely to be diagnosed with ADHD than girls because the signs and symptoms in boys display differently, and they're more likely to be seen and get diagnosed. And that has a lot to do with the numbers as well. If girls aren't being diagnosed with ADHD until later in life, after the age of 18, then that's where these trends are coming in that are saying that boys are more likely to be diagnosed because it's seen more. So we know that boys are more on the medication than girls. But girls still have the same struggle. They still need to be on these medications. We're just not getting diagnosed till later in life, which I can attest to because I wasn't diagnosed with ADHD until I was about 28. And I think that's why I wanted to do this chapter so badly, is because it really hits close to home for me. So boys are being diagnosed for ADHD and they're getting the treatment that they need in grade school. And meanwhile, girls are unable to, get the same help that they need, and our grades are going to suffer. And once I became diagnosed with ADHD and I brought it up to my parents, they actually told me that I was diagnosed with ADHD as a child, but since it was a new diagnosis and the medications were still new, they weren't, very positive to put me on medications, and my grades did suffer until about high school. They kind of leveled out and I was doing well, so my parents didn't think much of it. But once I got to college, my grades really suffered and I lost Pell and Hope because my GPA dropped down to a 2.9, 2.8. So once I realized that, there was more going on and I sought out treatment and I brought it up and, therapy that, something's off. I think I have ADHD. And, we go through the test, they diagnose me, put me on the appropriate medication. My grades, turned around for the better. And in just 2 years, my GPA went from a 2.9 to a 3.3. So having the appropriate care and the appropriate medications can help if they're caught. And that goes on. There is a stigma around mental illnesses and these diagnoses, but I think that if they're utilized properly and not just passed out to the wrong group, that it would reduce this stigma and people could actually get the help that they need. And likewise, being said, my stepdaughter, I was able to recognize the signs within her, and we sought out and got her the appropriate treatment and got her on medication. And she has turned around. She's doing much better in school, but being that combined with other disorders, it's a real struggle for these children. Now, that being said, this book also talks a lot about the other mental diagnoses that are being masked as ADHD, and these children are being diagnosed and given medication for ADHD, but they don't actually have it. They may have anxiety or depression or other things, and we prescribe them these medications, and then they become addicted to these medications. And it's sad to see, but it happens often. I've worked as a paramedic almost 10 years, and I've seen the effects of addiction on teens and young adults that are able to get their hands on, Ritalin, Adderall, methylphenidate, any of these medications that they use for school, but they abuse outside of school, and they start mixing it with other medications and other drugs and alcohol, and it becomes a lethal combination when they start combining all of these things. And when we pass out medications to the wrong group or we're misdiagnosing, that's what's happening, is we're setting these kids up for failure by not treating their anxiety or depression, instead slapping the label of ADHD onto these kids. And that's when they start abusing these medications. I think that this chapter is right on par, except for the pandemic kind of pushing people towards the telemedicine. I think that it's pretty on par with, expecting this trend to continue to go upward, as long as we're just slapping a label on these children and not actually diagnosing them with the issues that they may have and giving them proper treatment. But we're so quick to just slap a label on it, give them Adderall, and put them on their way. And not everyone's trained to see, the side effects of these medications, of weight loss, irritability, and then we start adding on, medications because it is a stimulant, and we're focused during the day, we're taking it, we're, missing meals and lack of appetite. And then we get to nighttime and we still have those same side effects. So then we're taking medication to bring us back down. And it becomes a really unhealthy balance of all of these medications that can go wrong. And we're teaching kids at a very young age that it's okay to take these medications. This is what you've been diagnosed with. This is what you need to take. And it's not at all how it needs to go. We need to treat these children specifically for their issues, and if they need another antipsychotic to help with the symptoms that have masked themselves as ADHD, or we're too lazy to see past these symptoms to label it as ADHD, we're going to continue down this rabbit hole of over-prescribing children medication that they don't need to be on, and they're going to continue to abuse it and sell it to their friends, and it's just an unhealthy cycle. And I'm interested to see more of these books, and just to compare these trends of every couple years, to be able to compare these statistics side by side, because like I said, this was from 2018, so I was able to pull up the statistics over the last few years to kind of do side by side comparisons. And honestly, it's sad to see so many people misdiagnosing children and allowing them to be put on medication early because they may not know better. They may not know their other signs and symptoms. And, the same can be said for the children that do need that diagnosis but are under poverty levels and unable to get that diagnosis. So, all in all, I agree with this chapter for the most part, other than, the numbers being off. But I think this is something that we need to shed more light on and, put a stop to the abuse of medications within children and get them the appropriate help that they need. So, yeah, thanks for listening to my rant.